Welcome to Bridging Borders, the podcast where we try to bridge the gap between cultures through insightful conversations.
Together, we explore diverse topics from productivity to language learning, all the while helping you improve your English skills.
Hey Veronica, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. I'm very excited for today's episode because we're going to be talking about language learning and how to become fluent in any language. Basically, our experience, some tips and tricks.
Yeah, I think you're a lot more experienced on this matter than I am, Veronica, because I can speak English and I can speak the very basics of Spanish.
But I think it's still, that you had this experience of learning Spanish, of living in Spain. You still have things to share with us too, and plus you're also an English teacher. So obviously, like, it's going to be a very different approach from when it comes to language learning, and especially when it comes to English because you're a native English speaker. So yeah, but when it comes to me, obviously, I'm not a native English speaker. My native language is Russian. I've been learning English for a very, very long time now, but I started learning English very seriously probably when I was 16, 17, and I am 24 years old right now. When I was in college, I majored in the Chinese language, so I spent 5 years learning Chinese. By the time I graduated, my Chinese was pretty good, actually. I would say I was definitely upper intermediate, which is amazing to have in Chinese. But I think right now, if I could go back and not choose this major and just focus on the Chinese language myself, I can do it like in 3 years for sure. Like, I can become very good at Chinese in 3 years if I just dedicate a lot of time to it, and that's it. But obviously, a few years ago, I moved to Mexico, and that's how I started learning Spanish. So, a lot of different languages, a lot of different experiences. But I always say that even though the languages might be different, the approach I took is always pretty much the same because you're learning a language. So, it's all the same, I would say.
So if you were to pick up a new language today, let's say French, how would you go about the first initial steps?
So I always say that what I am sharing is just things that worked for me, right? And that's why, like, for my on my YouTube channel, I try to share a lot of different things that I personally use and things I heard other people use. Because a few days ago, I was listening to this very interesting interview, and the girl there, like the guest of the interview, right? She said that it is very important to understand that if you see someone reach a certain point in their life and you're like, okay, if I repeat the same steps, I'm gonna get to where they are at right now. And it's not true. It's not gonna happen because you're a different person, you have different resources, you have a different lifestyle, you live in a different country, etc., etc. So, like, you have to understand that there's so many different tools and steps and strategies, and it's great to know all of them. But then you have to choose the ones that you think are going to work for you. So, again, answering your question, if I were to start learning French right now, usually what I do is the very first thing, I focus on the alphabet of the language. So that's like my first step in every single language, at least right now. I make sure I know how to pronounce all the sounds of this language. That's the very first step. If I'm not sure how to say a certain letter in the alphabet or how to make a certain sound, I book a class with a teacher. I try to ask them, oh, can you explain to me how to like make this sound? For example, in French, I probably would have difficulty with the sound, like Veronica or something like that. So probably I will have to work on that because just understanding the pronunciation, understanding how the sounds of the language work is very important. And that's why a lot of people have problems later on because they didn't spend enough time doing it at the very beginning. They're like, oh, I'm not sure. What about this sound? What about that sound? But I think it's important. And it's important to understand that a language is going to have sounds that are completely new to you. Like not trying to compare the sounds to your native language and be like, oh, the sound the in English sounds like this in my native language. It doesn't. It's a new sound, a
Yeah.
completely new sound. Forget about your native language here. So that would be my first step. The next step that I always personally do is I focus on the most common words in this language. I download this list of like 600 most common words in this language and I memorize all of them using Anki, the spaced repetition technology. Some people say don't do that. And I have heard this opinion as well, just because it's a waste of time. Like you're trying to memorize all of these words. And if you're actively engaged with the language, you are going to learn all of these common words. But I find that it works for me and it really speeds up the whole process. If I want it to be faster and more effective, I do that. And then I just get like a grammar book, a regular, just one grammar book. And sometimes I go like through like every single rule, kind of like slowly. And then I just focus on the topics that I'm interested in. If I'm interested in sports, I subscribe to a bunch of YouTube channels in French, right? Let's say where people talk about sports, they make vlogs. I basically try to surround myself with the language as much as possible. So yeah, like this is a rough picture.
Yeah. You just mentioned kind of increasing or starting to have some type of input in that language. So that could be reading a book or listening to a podcast or maybe watching a video, watching TV or whatever. Do you think that's good for a beginner, because they're probably not going to understand 90% of it, for example? So I remember when I was learning Spanish, I went onto the Spanish Netflix or found some things that were kind of the audio was in Spanish, and I actually settled on Pokemon because I thought it'd be for children, so it'd be like a little bit easier to understand. But I think maybe watching real people rather than cartoons might be better. But I don't know if there's any difference actually. And I watched them with subtitles because I think the academic literature or the leading research suggests that if you want to watch TV when learning a language, it's best to have it with subtitles and the original language. Some people do the opposite, where they kind of have the sound. Imagine you're learning English. You'd have the sound in English, but you'd have your native language in the subtitles so you can understand everything.
Don't do that.
That I don't think is a good idea. So it's best not to understand everything, but just watch it anyway. Do you think I think that's really good for upper intermediates and especially advanced level learners. Do you think that that's useful for beginners? Because like I said, they don't understand the majority of it.
Yeah, so I have a very good answer here. It doesn't matter where you're at in your language learning journey, beginner, intermediate, advanced, you always have to remember this concept of comprehensible input. Not just input, but comprehensible input. What does it mean? You think of your current level in this language. Let's say my current level in this language is 1. So comprehensible input for me will be 1 plus 1. So like you always have to do plus 1. If you're watching a show and you're realizing that this show is plus 10 to your current level, it is not for you to watch. You have to click off, stop watching it, just forget about it. Every single time you approach a new resource, whether it's a book, an audiobook, a YouTube video, always ask yourself this question: is it plus 1 to my current level? Is it challenging but not too much? If you find it plus 10, plus 20, no, like don't do that unless like you have just crazy self-discipline and will and you're gonna like do it. But I feel like at one point you're gonna get really tired and you're gonna just lose the fun in learning a language. You're gonna find it boring. You're just gonna be like, I don't want to do it anymore. Like it doesn't make sense. It's so difficult. And that's how people come to me and they tell me, Veronica, language learning is difficult. Just because you're using the wrong resources. You're choosing them based on this principle of my current level plus 10. And of course, if I choose something in Spanish that's going to be my current level plus 10, I'm going to give up probably. I'm going to feel very demotivated and feel like I'm a failure, like I don't understand anything. And that's not how I want to feel. So that's why, for example, at the very beginning, what I usually do, what I did with Spanish is I subscribe to a bunch of YouTube channels where people would teach beginners. So, like channels that are more like teaching you something, right? They will teach you some like very basic grammar rules or some like common words in Spanish. And usually the whole video would be in English, maybe a few words in Spanish. And I'll be like, okay, these are new words. I love it. Like some new sentences. There are actually a podcast like dedicated to beginners in a lot of different languages, like beginners in Spanish or beginners in French or in English. Especially in English, when it comes to English, there's so many resources right now, so you will definitely find it. Yeah, so then I would just move up. If I feel like, okay, I'm ready to watch a vlog by a native speaker, I try to watch it, and then if I see that it's still a little bit too hard, I'm like, okay, let me wait a little bit. Maybe I need to learn more vocabulary, or maybe I need to improve my grammar to be able to understand what they're saying. But most likely it's vocabulary. That's something that really hinders your comprehension. That's why focusing on vocabulary is important.
Yeah, I think kind of reading or listening to things with visual context is really useful as well.
Yes.
So instead of listening to a podcast, if you're a beginner, listening to a podcast is going to be so difficult because if you don't understand the majority of it, you've got no context of what they're actually speaking about. You might have a title, but that's about it. After like one or two sentences, you're gone. So with a TV show, some TV shows, like the reason I watched Pokemon, for example, I could understand what was going on, even if I didn't understand a word. Like I could just put it on a random language or even put it silent, probably. Maybe with a language I can hear the tone, so I can guess some emotion or something. But even if I don't understand, I still have a grasp of the story and what's going on, how people feel. And then you can associate kind of the words with the context, which I think is quite useful. Don't strictly do that, but you have a better idea of what they're actually saying. So I think I read once that Friends is the best TV show that you can watch in English. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've read it somewhere, because even if you can like tell the emotions on the face of all the characters, and you can follow the storylines pretty easily without understanding kind of a word of what they're actually saying. But because it's Americans are quite over the top with their emotions sometimes, especially, well, I'm talking relative to British people. You can kind of follow how they're feeling, the storylines, the problems with the characters, just on the basis of their kind of movements, the body movements, their face, and interactions and stuff like that. So yeah, I think TV is probably better than podcasts for beginners.
Absolutely. I would say that Friends is a good TV show, but if you're a complete beginner, probably it's going to
Yeah.
be hard for you to understand. Yeah, because they do use a lot of idioms, a lot of phrasal verbs. I remember when I was watching Friends, I probably like I don't have this notebook anymore, but I had like a full notebook with notes with like new vocabulary from Friends. And I like at that time I thought my English was pretty good. And I was like, okay, what about this? I think for me, what was very frustrating when I was watching Friends is not so much the vocabulary they were using, but more the cultural context of everything. Because I still remember the day when I was watching the episode about the ball drop in New York City, how like for New Year's they have this like ball that drops on the main square and like everyone is obsessed with it, like they want to see it. And first, when I heard it, I remember watching this episode and I was like, what are they talking about? What ball? Like, what is going on? I have zero cultural context because back then I lived in Russia. I was like, what is going on? And I think, like, the more you start feeling like you're not in the context of things, I started feeling very frustrated at one point because they were making a lot of references to like famous people in the States, some like I don't know, football players and stuff like that. And I was like, is it funny? Should I laugh? Like, what is going on? So I feel like in those moments, it's important to be kind to yourself and understand that it's fine. You're not going to understand everything about this culture because you were not born into this culture. You were not raised there. So it's absolutely okay. Just enjoy it. Laugh if you want to laugh. If you don't want to laugh, it's fine. So just be more kind to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, comedy programs and films are actually probably the most difficult to understand because comedy is a completely different kind of part of language, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is, a lot more difficult for people to understand if you're not a native speaker because of what you just said, the cultural context, and also a lot of references, informal words, slang. The grammar
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always kind of isn't always perfect, for example, so it's hard to understand it. But yeah, I think you're right. Do you think it's important for people to get a tutor from the start? Obviously, you can learn a language by yourself. Absolutely doable. But if
Mm-hmm.
someone has the time and they have the money, do you think it's worthwhile going to a language school or maybe having a private tutor? Do you think that's worthwhile at the beginner stage?
I think it's important to understand why you're doing this. So, like, what is your motivation behind it? Because if you want to find a tutor or a language school just because you want to put this responsibility on another person of like learning this language, you want to say, okay, I have a teacher now. So I'm going to learn the language. Kind of like putting the responsibility on your teacher instead of becoming responsible for your language learning yourself, or like on the language school saying things like, yeah, I wasn't able to learn English because my language school was not that great, or because my English teacher was not that great. That's why I didn't learn English. Nah, like it's an excuse. It's one of the biggest excuses out there. I would say that it is useful. I did go to a language school once in English because I really wanted to experience the sense of community. And that's why I went there. Because basically, what happens is like you go there, you're present in a classroom, you're learning something with a teacher. I would say, in terms of pace, it can be a lot more effective to learn at home because you don't have to spend time traveling, instead of commuting. I mean, I'm commuting to your language school. But for me, I just really wanted to feel like I'm a part of this like community of students who are learning English. Like I have a teacher who I can like physically see in a classroom and ask them all the questions. So that's why I was going there. I wasn't going there to learn English super fast. No, because I could have, learned the whole material probably 3 times faster on my own. So that's when it comes to language skills. When it comes to just having a teacher, for example, online, taking classes, it can be great. Again, depends on what you want. If you want to speak to someone who's going to correct you. If you have certain questions, then it's great. It's amazing. But again, just please, please, please don't put the responsibility of learning a foreign language on your teacher and saying things like, my teacher didn't teach me this, and that's why I don't know about this. No, 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 no. The teacher is there to maybe motivate you, to give you feedback, to help you if you have a problem and stuff like that. And everything else you can do on your own. You are still responsible for how fast you're learning a foreign language.
Yeah, 100% I agree. And if you are a beginner, I'd probably recommend finding a tutor that speaks your native language because
Mm-hmm.
if you are a
Yes.
beginner,
Very good point.
for example, if someone is Russian and they come to me and they have a class with me and I speak no Russian and they're a beginner English, we're just going to be sitting in the classroom staring at each other, not being able to communicate. So
Hello.
yeah,
Hello.
exactly. I don't recommend that. So you don't have to do that if you're an upper intermediate. So for example, I speak the very basics of Spanish. I don't speak any other languages. I have students from all over the world. So when you're in an upper intermediate level or even intermediate, it's absolutely doable. But with
Mm-hmm.
a beginner, definitely choose someone who can speak your native language.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, and that's I think where a teacher who speaks your native language will be great for you. Yeah, you will benefit from this interaction so freaking much, just because sometimes you're like, okay, I didn't quite understand what you meant. Can you say it in like my native language now?
Hmm.
So that like I'm sure like, okay, this is what it is. Yeah, but then once you're progressing, the goal is to eliminate the language completely, your native language from your learning. So when you learn grammar, vocabulary has to be without your native language. Like all the new words you're memorizing, don't use your native language. Try to use pictures if it's possible. Try to use definitions in this language if it's possible when you're progressing, especially like intermediate, advanced. Don't translate. Like try to stop translating as much as possible. It's not going to do you any good. Like the point is to make your brain think only in this language when you're speaking this language, to access all of these words in this new foreign language. And you don't want to create the connection of a cat is this word in my native language and then the picture of a cat. No, it has to be a picture of a cat and immediately the word cat in English. The same thing in Spanish. Now, when I look at a cat, if I want to think in Spanish, I immediately think it's a gato. I don't think, okay, it's a cat, or what is it in my native language? Okay, what is it in Spanish now? No, like you're trying to make the connections shorter so that your brain accesses the information faster.
Yeah, that's something that I'm always doing with my students who are a bit of a lower level, so around the intermediate or kind of just bordering the upper intermediate. A lot of them still try to translate, maybe when they're trying to explain a difficult concept, or we're talking
Yes,
about something a little bit more complicated and they're thinking, okay, how do I say this in English? And I think, how do I say this in my native language? And then I'll translate that into English. But often, as you definitely know, the direct translations mostly come out wrong. So if you
exactly.
can think about it in the language you're learning, it's best to do it like that. But sometimes it's always necessary.
And that's recently what I've started to experience with Spanish, because sometimes when I say things in Spanish, they sound like it's English Spanish. Because I'm learning, and that's actually like this like beauty of learning foreign languages. Because at one point you can use your foreign language as a base for learning a new language. So like my Spanish learning happens exclusively with the help of English if I need English. Like I don't even know how to say like certain grammatical things in Russian, let's say like Spanish related. So it's also cool because this way I'm learning Spanish and I'm kind of practicing my English at the same time. Yeah, so I really like it, like this experience of like just stacking your languages at one point.
Yeah, for example, in Spanish they say take a drink, but in English we say have a drink. And
Yeah.
if you're trying to speak English and you're saying should we take a coffee or a beer, people
Mm,
will be like, "What? What do you mean take it? Like take it away from
yeah.
the coffee shop or the pub?"
Yeah, and I also noticed like a lot of people here in Mexico say first when I didn't know any Spanish, I was like, interesting. I wonder why they say it. And now I know why. So basically what they do here is a lot of people here say I have 24 years old in English.
Yeah.
Because in Spanish it's the verb to have. And now I know, and now I understand those people a lot more because of that. You kind of have like this next level of understanding. You're like, oh, I get what you mean. I understand why you're saying it this way because of the influence of your native language.
Yeah, I forgot about that one. That's a good example as well.
Mm-hmm.
One last tip from me on this beginner stage is to speak from the very beginning, even if it's the very basics, because I've met so many students, especially when I was teaching in Spain in vocational college. I taught loads of like 18, 19-year-olds just before they're going to university or going to get a job. And I had to speak English with them. That was basically my job there, and to help them speak English because a lot of them could read English fine, listening a little bit more difficult, but they just never spoke it because in their actual formal setting of learning English in school, a lot of the practice wasn't speaking practice. And I know people who go on Duolingo, for example, and they've got 100 days of Duolingo in whatever language, and you ask them to say like two sentences and they've never really practiced it, so they can't. And then they go on
Yeah.
holiday and you're actually faced with, oh, I have to speak this language that I've been learning for a while. But if you haven't actually spoken it, it's a completely different skill of actually reading and understanding something and then having to formulate it in your head to actually say it out loud. And even if you practice through writing, because listening, reading is input, kind of writing, speaking is output. And you could think, oh, I'll just write loads because that's basically speaking, but completely different skill as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think also what a lot of people experience is they try to think, okay, I'm learning a new language. So where should I start? Like I should start with like learning the basics and then I should move on to something more difficult. But I always say that like the basics, they don't exist. Like what do you need in this language? Why do you need to learn this language? For example, my goal in Spanish was like to communicate with people outside, to talk to my like friends in Spanish. So the very first thing I remember I learned was how to order matcha at like a coffee shop. And some people would say it is not, basics. Like, why do you need to know how to say like matcha and stuff like that? But I do. I mean, it's the exact same word. But anyway,
Exam.
it's just like this is what I need, and that's why I'm learning this language. And I don't want to know how to say a giraffe in Spanish.
So
Well, maybe at one point I will have to learn this word, but like at the very beginning of my journey, that was not my priority. I wasn't going to zoos, I wasn't interacting with giraffes, you know what I mean? So like when it comes to time and like time constraints and how it has to be extremely relevant to your life, because those are the questions that people are going to be asking you. Where are you from? What do you do for work? What do you like? And stuff like that. What are you doing in your free time? And if you know how to say all the different colors in this world, in this language, but you don't know how to describe what you do for a living, yeah, that's where people experience a lot of difficulties.
Yeah, I think that approach is called task-based learning, where you're just learning. I think that's true. Where you're just learning for actual things that you actually genuinely need, rather than learning things for like a purpose, like passing an exam. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you're doing the IELTS or whatever, you have to learn the format of the IELTS, and you just maybe just be focusing on the vocabulary and the language and the
Yeah.
certain discussion questions for that. But if you imagine you just smash the IELTS exam, you get the perfect score, you can now go to the university or the job. But then you go to university and you sit down at a table with a few of the students and you're like, hold on a minute, I've never actually spoken in a social setting of like with people my
Exactly.
age in English or any language you're learning. So it's really important to actually learn and focus. Like the basics maybe are important, not what you said, like animals. It's kind of silly that we kind of push this on people who think, okay, learn the colors, learn the
Learn the
months,
animals, the months,
learn the animals.
exactly.
Yeah. It was like, how often do you actually really need that? So yeah,
Hmm.
I think learning languages kind of for the actual use case of when you're going to use it is really important.
Hmm.
Okay. So that's what someone should do if they're kind of starting to learn a new language. I can imagine most people listening to this podcast are an intermediate level in English, like minimum. Maybe some
Hmm.
people are advanced, upper intermediates. Some people get stuck at this stage where they feel like they've been an intermediate for years and they just can't get to that next level. I know these kind of actual categories are a bit vague, and some people classify themselves as an advanced and they're really an intermediate. They're not really that important, in my opinion. But some people feel like they get to an intermediate level and they just get stuck. So, do you have any tips for people of kind of actually taking the language level to the next stage?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, what we kind of just talked about a little bit, is ditching your native language. Just completely stop using your native language when you interact with the language you want to learn. Probably one of the reasons why you're still stuck is because you're still translating everything. Everything has to be translated. You're afraid that you're not going to understand, but just try. Just try to especially right now with AI, everything is so much simpler. If you're learning a new word, even if it's extremely difficult, you feel like you need your native language, no, you don't. Just use ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, can you please explain this word to me very simply, like extremely simply? And it's going to do the job really well. Because unfortunately, a lot of dictionaries out there, they do use a lot of complicated words. And I always say, if you're trying to memorize a word, make sure the definition of this word includes all the words that you know. Because sometimes what happens is like you try to understand what the words, I don't know, something more like difficult, like turquoise, this color, like what does it mean? And the definition includes like the color that you also don't
Yeah.
know. And like, of course, you're not going to memorize it. But when it comes to something visual, like a color, for example, you don't even need a picture. Like, see something that is turquoise. Maybe you have like a notebook that's turquoise on your table, and you create a sentence like, oh, my favorite notebook is this color, and stuff like that. So, definitely this thing, just stop translating, stop using your language. And I would say the second thing is something that helped me a lot is just writing down a list of everything you're interested in your life. Like, what are the things that you do every single day, the things you're interested in? Let's say you really like boxing. Like, this is your passion. You practice boxing. You love watching it on TV. So, what you do is you kind of explore this topic very deeply. Instead of kind of like going very broad, you start going very deep on this topic, and you do everything in the language that you want to learn. You start following YouTubers that talk about boxing. You start reading newspaper articles that talk about boxing in this specific language, in your target language. Yeah, this is what I did with nutrition, because at one point in my life I got so interested, just sucked into this topic of nutrition, and I was learning everything in English. And naturally I memorized so many words, so many diseases and illnesses, and different like minerals, micronutrients, and stuff like that. It just happened naturally because I was in this, environment. I created this environment for myself. Yeah, I personally find it extremely useful. What are the things that you think might be useful for the students that probably for sure you have those students who are stuck at this intermediate level? What do you think helps them?
I think just increasing the volume. I think it's almost a little bit like anything else. I think if you're kind of at a specific stage, maybe you're not being as efficient as you could be when you're doing the actual work of learning a language, if you want to call it work. Or you could just increase the volume, like increase the input and also increase the output. So imagine if you have an English class once a week and that's it, just 1 hour of English, then and you're only thinking in English once a week. That's if you just kind of do that by 10x that, and you do 10 hours of English per week, you're going to increase. And you don't have to do that in 10 hours of classes. You could listen to 2 podcasts a week. You could watch some TV in English. Just mix it up and make it easy. Obviously, you don't need to 10x it. That's an extreme example. But even if you just double the amount by doing an extra hour, then you're just going to have more. You're just going to be living in the English world in your brain a lot more than you are in your native language or whatever language you're learning. I think that's what I usually recommend for my students when I have a trial class with them. I often ask them, so how much do you engage in English, like per day on average and per week? Like, how often are you listening to someone speak English? How often are you speaking English? How often are you reading English? Do you watch any TV in English, podcasts in English? I'm always thinking about ways of, like you said, kind of finding subjects that they enjoy. So I ask them that likes, hobbies, interests, what they do in their free time, what do they actually enjoy consuming in their native language, and just finding material which will just increase their input in that chosen language, which I think is really useful because I've had so many students where I just send them. This is the actual nice thing about having a tutor in that native language, is that you probably don't have that much knowledge of the resources available. So because I live in the UK and I'm British, some people who are learning English come to me and they're saying, I'm interested in business or whatever. They don't maybe know some of the podcasts or YouTube channels or TV shows that are in English, and they produce a lot of TV shows in England. So I can tell them about Dragon's Den, for example, where an entrepreneur comes into the boardroom and gives a pitch and asks for an investment off, some entrepreneurs themselves, and they talk about business. And if someone is interested in business and entrepreneurship, then this is a great TV program for them. But it's in the UK, and I don't think most people outside the UK know what this is. And you get a wide range of British accents on there, so that's actually one of the kind of good points about having a tutor in your chosen language that you're learning is because it depends who they are. I kind of watch a lot of, I'm aware of a lot of TV and podcasts and films and stuff, so I'm able to kind of recommend a lot of things. And for example, one of my students came to me and they said, Sam, I've got Scottish colleagues, and I really struggle to understand them. I'm like, don't worry, I struggle to
Me
understand them
too.
too. Yeah. So, but I know a lot of famous Scottish people, stand-up comedians, kind of famous actors and stuff, and I know who they are, and I can send them like 3 videos a week of someone with a Scottish accent, and they're increasing their input of listening to them and trying to understand them. So that's one of the ways that I help people kind of get to the next level. I think having a tutor is, I'm not just kind of advertising my job now, but yeah,
No, go ahead. You should.
or just like telling people you need a tutor. You don't, but it can help when you get to that kind of intermediate stage, because you might have a weakness in your language, and it's really important to identify that weakness and kind of improve it. So I've had so many students who are upper intermediate, but they struggle with different things. Some people, they struggle with pronunciation because they're speaking English with the kind of the mouth shapes and the tongue movements that they speak in their native language. So there's a
Yes.
really good YouTube channel, I'll actually maybe link it in the bio, who does videos. It's like, why do Chinese people sound Chinese, or why do Italian people sound Italian?
Oh, this is
And
very
they talk about
interesting.
the specific sounds in their native language, which are hard to kind of say or kind of speak when you're speaking English. And they identify those sounds and they give examples. It's really good. And some people really struggle with that. So a French person, if I have like a French person will have specific problems that a Chinese person might not. And usually I tailor their kind of the pronunciation exercises, often with ChatGPT or kind of Google if I'm feeling old school, to find exercises specifically tailored for them, which can help them sound not kind of, I don't, the accent's a bit of a weird one because some people want to like eradicate their accents. So for example, you might have wanted to like get rid of your Russian accent, or I know people who don't want to sound French, they don't want to sound Spanish. I had a class with someone once and it's like, I've got a presentation in a week and I want to sound British. And I'm like, you sound so Spanish right now, that's impossible. And I was like, I'm sorry, but your goal is not realistic whatsoever. And I don't think it's bad if someone sounds Chinese, or if someone sounds Russian, or someone sounds Italian. I actually like it when people have that kind of native accent speaking different languages, but sometimes it can be a problem when it kind of gets in the way of people understanding them. So, but some people have problems with confidence, some people have problems with listening. So once you get to that intermediate stage, it is useful to have a tutor, not permanently, but even if if you just spend an hour with them and you're like, I'm going to pay you for an hour, can you just kind of assess my English and tell me what my weaknesses are? And then you can go on your own. So I think just finding out what your weaknesses are and then strengthening those is a really good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I like what you said about like having realistic goals. Yeah, something that you mentioned. It's also extremely important. If you have a presentation next week, if you want to sound like a completely different person,
Yeah.
I mean, you can for sure improve in a week, but like not to that extent. So having realistic goals is extremely important. Yeah, for sure. And when it comes to your accent, I would say I I think it's important when you start learning a language to understand what kind of accent you're interested in, to find the right resources. Because for example, for me with Spanish, I knew that because I live in Mexico, I want to learn Mexican Spanish, at least begin with it. Because obviously when you start improving, you get to intermediate, advanced level, then you can, start listening to a lot of different accents in Spanish. But at the very beginning, you kind of have to stick to something to make it easier for you. That's what I did with English. I chose the American accent because if I wanted to sound American and British and, learn like Scottish accent, yeah, I would feel extremely overwhelmed.
How did you, because if I heard you speak, I would never guess that you're from Russia. So how did you develop your English accent and get rid of your native kind of sounding accent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting because when I talk to Americans, they always they're always very like interested in where I'm from because I like once I start talking to them, they're like, "Yeah, I can hear that you're not a native speaker, but I can't pinpoint you. Like, where are you from?" And I'm like, "Guess." Yeah, they can never guess, never. It's very funny. Sometimes they try to guess based on my appearance. They're like, "Oh, you look Slavic. You're probably from Eastern Europe." So, yeah, but no, it's different. I would say what helped me a lot is just doing like practicing a lot. That's what I did, like learning all of the rules and practicing over and over and over again. It's still like a journey. I'm still improving my accent, still learning new things. If you watch my YouTube videos 2 years ago, I sounded very different than I do right now. Just because I'm always working on my accent. I'm always trying to learn something new and I always try to mimic Americans. When I like notice they use a special phrase or the way they pronounce a certain sound, like I don't know, remember when one day I noticed how some Americans say groceries instead of groceries, like the sh kind of sound, and I was like, groceries, groceries. Interesting. So like those little things when you notice them, it's fun. I really like it. I think because I don't know, at one point I just really wanted to sound American. So I think I actually had this goal of like eradicating my accent. Probably was not very healthy because like you can't start sounding like a different person, in a week or a month or maybe even a year. I don't know how long it takes. Like I still don't sound 100% American. So I feel like at one point I just realized that the way I approached accent training and language learning was not healthy and was not sustainable. And I had to change something about that. And once I did, I became a lot happier. Now I'm a lot happier when I talk to Americans. If they say something that I don't know, I ask and I don't feel like I am dumb, like what's something that a lot of language learners feel. I don't feel like I'm less than them. I'm like, oh, this is a cool phrase. Can you explain what it means? Or, oh, like, this was like a funny joke, but I didn't quite like catch it, like, because it included something cultural. Can you explain it to me? And I feel like when I do it this way, I just feel so much happier because I don't have to pretend like I know everything, like I understand everything in English. No, I don't, because it's not my native language. I didn't grow up in the States. So it just makes me feel so much calmer and peaceful and at peace when I just understand that it's fine. I don't know certain words and it's totally okay.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and a lot of people do have an unhealthy relationship with their accent when speaking English, from my experience anyway. And
Yes,
the
for
important thing
sure.
is not complete accent reduction. And, maybe someone's dream goal is to sound very posh or like Harry Potter, like someone from Harry Potter or Downton
Harry
Abbey or
Potter.
American. Yes, exactly.
How's my
But
British English?
yeah, that's pretty good actually. More British than me. But yeah, I think just so people can understand you, that's the goal, really, isn't it? Unless you think
Mm-hmm.
that people are judging you or stereotyping you due to your accent, then maybe that's just a problem that you might have internally. But
Yes,
if you do feel
probably.
like that could be a problem in your industry or whatever, then you might want to try and do accent reduction even further. But who knows? It's obviously just personal and people's preferences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being kind to yourself, not trying to reach this like perfect version, perfectionism and stuff like that. No, just like learning a language, trying to make it fun. And yeah, if you want to improve your accent, please do, but don't feel like if you can't pronounce a certain sound, you're bad or you're a failure or something is not working out. You will understand it. Like I've struggled a lot with this one particular grammar rule in Spanish, and for the longest time I just could not understand the difference between two grammar rules. Every single conversation, I would mix them up. Every single class with my teacher, I was just like, I just want to say it this way. Like, I don't understand why native speakers have to say it this way. And as time went by, now, like yesterday, I think I opened my grammar book and I was like, I get it now. Like, just something changes, and maybe it's not the time yet. And at one point, you will understand it better. You will be able to produce the sound. Just give it time and be patient.
Yeah. So immerse yourself in a language is a good tip, especially going kind of to the country. So if you're learning English, visiting England or United States or Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or somewhere like that is really useful. Even if it's just a holiday, it could be fun. And there are definitely like experiences that you can go on where you you stay with other people learning that language, which could be really fun. Or you can do it at home by changing your phone settings, for example, or changing the settings on your computer or all your devices and watching films and increasing your input or content or whatever you want to call it. So that, getting a tutor, being kind to yourself, I think they're all pretty good tips for getting to that kind of next level if you feel like you are stuck. Do you have anything final to add, Veronica?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I think we shared everything. Just remember, if you're choosing a resource, always ask yourself this question: is it +1 to my current level? If it's anything higher, not the resource for you to use. Well, unless you love the pain, you love the struggle, you love the grind.
Yeah, being confused.
Yeah.
And not understanding things.
Yep.
Okay, well, hope everyone found that useful, and thank you, Veronica.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Bridging Borders. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more useful insights.
Stay connected by following us on social media. You can find us at bridging_borders_podcast. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep connecting.